Sometimes the past we thought was buried comes knocking at our door, demanding answers we aren't ready to give. She was abandoned as a baby at a mansion's doorstep, but 25 years later she returns, and what she finds will break your heart. Stay with us till the end for a story you won't forget. The mansion stood like a sleeping giant at the edge of the city, grand and cold beneath the pale winter sky. Its iron gates, twisted into elaborate vines, had long since been a symbol of wealth and power, but that morning they were a witness to something fragile. Bundled in a worn, tattered blanket, a newborn baby girl with deep brown skin and tearful cries was left at the front door. The butler, Mr. Alcott, discovered her just after sunrise, his gloved hands trembling as he lifted the tiny bundle. Inside, the house stirred with confusion. Who would leave a child here, and why? Nathaniel Hartwell, the mansion's owner, was a man accustomed to control. At 55, he ran businesses across 3 continents, commanded boardrooms with a single glance, and had built his empire from ruthless ambition. Yet as he stood in his grand foyer, staring down at the crying infant in Alcott's arms, for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. Word spread quickly among the staff. Some whispered that it was a scandal waiting to erupt. Others speculated it was a cruel joke, or worse, a trap. Nathaniel's advisors urged him to stay detached, to let the city deal with the abandoned child. But that night, after the house had gone quiet, Nathaniel stood alone in the nursery that hadn't been touched since his wife's death a decade earlier. The crib still sat in the corner, gathering dust. He stared at it for a long time before finally placing the baby inside, her cries softening into whimpers. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it was practicality. But days turned into weeks, and the paperwork to transfer her into foster care mysteriously never got filed. Nathaniel named her Amara, Grace, a name his late wife once said she would have given a daughter if they'd been blessed with one. The mansion, once hollow and echoing, began to fill with new sounds. The soft thuds of tiny footsteps, giggles chasing down hallways, the shriek of toddler laughter bouncing off marble floors. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Nathaniel never legally adopted Amara. He provided everything she needed: tutors, toys, a nursemaid who loved her dearly. But he kept a distance, emotionally locked behind a fortress of grief and guilt. To the outside world, she was the orphan he had taken in out of charity. To Amara, growing up, he was both a savior and a stranger. And though he never spoke the words, she knew deep down she was never truly his. It was a truth that clung to her as she grew older, a wound that never fully healed. One day, without warning, she left, disappearing from the mansion's walls as quietly as she had once arrived. Now, 25 years later, a woman stood at those same iron gates. Her skin was rich and radiant against the crisp autumn light. She wore a simple coat, worn at the edges, but her posture was unbreakable. In her hand she clutched a letter, one she had found only months earlier, tucked deep inside the belongings of the woman who had raised her in secret after she vanished. A letter written in a hand she recognized immediately. Nathaniel Hartwell. Amara pressed the buzzer by the gate. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it would drown out the world. Somewhere inside that sprawling, cold mansion, the answers she had sought her whole life waited. And so did a truth more devastating than she could have ever imagined. The intercom crackled to life, startling Nathaniel where he sat reading by the study window. Alcott's voice came through, cautious. "Sir, there's someone at the gate. She says her name is Amara." Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat, the book slipping from his lap. For a moment, he didn't move. Could it really be her? After all these years? He stood, stiff from shock, and made his way to the gate control. He hesitated, then pressed the button to open the gates. From the study window he watched as a young woman stepped through, head high, posture steady despite the burden he imagined she carried. She was no longer the wide-eyed child he remembered, but there was no mistaking her. His Amara. Amara walked the familiar path up to the mansion with a strange mix of dread and defiance coiled inside her. Every stone, every vine along the wall carried a memory, some soft, some bruising. When the heavy front doors opened, it was Alcott who greeted her. His face was older, lined with years, but the kindness in his eyes was still there. "Miss Amara," he said, bowing slightly, voice thick with emotion, "we've been waiting for you." She gave a tight smile but said nothing. Inside, the grand foyer stretched before her, unchanged, yet everything felt foreign, cold. Amara walked the familiar path up to the mansion with a strange mix of dread and defiance coiled inside her. Every stone, every vine along the wall carried a memory, some soft, some bruising. When the heavy front doors opened, it was Alcott who greeted her. His face was older, lined with years, but the kindness in his eyes was still there. "Miss Amara," he said, bowing slightly, voice thick with emotion, "we've been waiting for you." She gave a tight smile but said nothing. Inside, the grand foyer stretched before her, unchanged, yet everything felt foreign, cold. The study was exactly as she remembered. Dark woods, leather chairs, shelves burdened with books no one seemed to read. Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of water, his hands betraying a slight tremor. Amara remained standing, refusing the seat he offered. "I found a letter," she said without preamble, "among my foster mother's things. It was from you." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I wrote many. None were sent." She searched his face for lies, finding only exhaustion. "Why not?" she demanded. "You abandoned me. You let me think I was unwanted, a mistake." His shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. "I thought it was what you needed, a clean break, a life away from this coldness." Mila's voice broke despite herself. "I didn't need distance. I needed answers. I needed you." Nathaniel moved toward her, then stopped himself. "I failed you," he said simply. "There's no excuse, but I never stopped thinking of you. Never stopped hoping you would come back." The fight drained from her body, replaced by a hollow ache. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Nathaniel watched her for a moment before crossing the room and kneeling beside her. "I can't change the past," he whispered, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future." For the first time, Amara let the walls around her tremble. She looked up, tears shining. The past was a wound, deep, ragged. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't beyond healing. The next morning, Amara awoke in one of the old guest rooms, the same one she had slept in as a child when nightmares chased her through the long, empty halls. The scent of fresh linens and lemon polish wrapped around her as she sat up, disoriented. For a moment, she imagined herself back in time, before the abandonment, before the questions. But reality seeped in quickly. She wasn't a child anymore, and this wasn't her home. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, her footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. In the dining room, Nathaniel sat at the head of a long table, reading the paper. He looked up when she entered, offering a tentative smile. "Good morning," he said. Amara nodded stiffly. The distance between them was still palpable, an invisible chasm filled with words unspoken. Over breakfast, conversation was sparse, but civil. Nathaniel seemed to tread carefully, as if afraid that one wrong word would send her running again. Amara studied him between sips of coffee, noting the way his hand shook slightly as he buttered his toast, the faint shadows under his eyes. He wasn't the invincible man she remembered. He was smaller somehow, more human. After a strained silence, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "There's something you should see," he said. Amara set her cup down slowly. "What is it?" He hesitated. "A journal." "Your mother's?" The room tilted slightly around her. "My mother?" she echoed. "You knew her?" Nathaniel's face folded into grief. "More than you know." He led her to the old library, a room she had rarely entered as a child. The air smelled of dust and leather and forgotten things. Nathaniel crossed to a locked cabinet and produced a small key from around his neck. Inside, he retrieved a weathered, leather-bound journal and handed it to her with surprising reverence. Amara took it with trembling fingers. The name Eveline was etched faintly on the cover. "Your mother worked here," Nathaniel said softly. "Years before you were born. We cared for each other." Amara flipped through the pages, heart hammering. The entries were filled with delicate handwriting, sketches of gardens, notes about dreams and fears. And then she found it. An entry dated a few weeks before her birth. "I can't stay here," it read. "Nathaniel's world is too cold, too full of ghosts. Our baby deserves warmth. I will leave before it's too late." Amara closed the journal with shaking hands. "She left because of you," she whispered. Nathaniel's face crumpled. "I never meant to drive her away. I didn't know about you until she was gone." He moved to sit but stopped himself. "By the time I learned, it was too late. She had vanished, and when you appeared at the doorstep months later, I didn't even know you were mine." Amara hugged the journal to her chest, the ache inside her growing. Everything she had believed, every wound she had carried. It was deeper and messier than she ever imagined. Later that evening, Amara sat alone in the library, the journal open on her lap. Candlelight flickered against the high ceilings. She read and reread her mother's words, piecing together the story she had never been told. Evelyn had loved fiercely, but had been overwhelmed by fear. Fear of being trapped, of being erased by a world that never welcomed her. Amara realized then that her abandonment wasn't simple cruelty, it was a desperate act of love, flawed but real. And maybe, just maybe, Nathaniel's coldness wasn't hate either. It was grief, fear, the same fear that had driven her mother away. Closing the journal, Amara exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. The mansion wasn't a place of answers. It was a place of broken hearts, stitched together by time, regret, and the fragile hope of redemption. The next morning, rain lashed against the high windows, turning the mansion's stone walls into a watercolor of shadows. Amara stood by the window of her childhood room, her hands curled around a cup of untouched coffee. The journal lay on the nightstand, its presence heavy. Every page she had read whispered different truths, all of them bittersweet. She had learned enough to fill the empty spaces of her past, but knowing wasn't the same as forgiving. Behind her, a soft knock sounded. She didn't turn. "Come in," she said, voice flat. Nathaniel entered carrying an envelope. His steps were hesitant, his presence careful, as if afraid she might shatter if he came too close. "I know you have every right to walk away," Nathaniel said, voice rough with fatigue, "but before you decide, I want you to have this." He placed the envelope on the small table between them. Amara stared at it without moving. "What is it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Proof," he said simply, "of everything I failed to say." With that, he turned and left, the door clicking softly behind him. Amara sat for a long time before reaching for the envelope. Inside was a collection of letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, all written over the years. Birthday wishes, Christmas regrets, apologies, hopes. She unfolded one at random, the ink smudged as if by a trembling hand. "Today would have been your 5th birthday," it began. "I wonder if you laughed like she did." Tears blurred the words. She pulled another. "You must be starting school soon. I wonder if you're brave." Another. "I hope you know you are loved, even if you can't hear it from me." Amara pressed the letters to her chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. All this time she had believed she was forgotten, discarded like something inconvenient. But here, in these fragile papers, was proof that she had been missed, mourned, cherished. If only from a distance. It didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it, and that, she realized, was a beginning. Hours later, she found herself in the garden, umbrella abandoned, rain soaking through her clothes. She stood among the roses, their petals drooping under the weight of the storm. Nathaniel watched from the stone steps, hesitant. Then, gathering his courage, he stepped out into the rain, no umbrella, no coat. Just a father, raw and broken, approaching the daughter he had failed. "I never wanted to lose you," he said, voice barely carrying over the rain. "But I didn't know how to keep you without breaking you." Amara turned, water streaming down her face, indistinguishably from her tears. "I'm still broken," she said, "but maybe we can heal differently now." Nathaniel crossed the final distance between them, stopping a respectful arm's length away. "I will never ask you to forgive me," he said, "but I will spend the rest of my life proving I am worth being forgiven." Amara studied him, the stubborn line of his jaw, the regret carved into the lines around his eyes. And then, slowly, She closed the space between them. She rested her forehead against his chest, his arms coming up to hold her, tentative at first, then strong. The rain washed over them both, soaking into their skin, their clothes, their brokenness. And for the first time the mansion didn't feel haunted by the past. It felt blessed by the possibility of something new, something real. The rain faded overnight, leaving the world washed clean, the mansion's stonework glistening under a pale sun. Amara woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint sound of music playing somewhere downstairs. For a moment she stayed in bed listening, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She rose and dressed simply, drawn by the music's soft pull. In the dining room, Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, a small stack of papers in front of him and 2 plates of breakfast laid out. He looked up when she entered, offering a tentative smile that she returned, cautious but real. They ate together without the tension that had once thickened every moment between them. Between bites of toast and sips of coffee, Nathaniel finally pushed the papers toward her. "I want you to read this," he said. Amara hesitated, then picked up the first page. It was a revised will. He had made her his legal heir, but not just to his fortune, to everything. The mansion, his art collection, his name. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. Nathaniel nodded. "I know. This isn't about money. It's about making sure you always know where you belong." Mara folded the papers carefully, touched by the gesture but still overwhelmed. "It's going to take time," she said, her voice steady but soft. "For me to trust this, to trust us." Nathaniel's eyes didn't waver. "Take all the time you need. I'll still be here." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't begging. It was a promise, quietly offered. And for the first time, Mara believed him. After breakfast, they walked the grounds together, touring the old gardens that had once been Amara's playground. The rose bushes had grown wild, and the fountain in the center stood dry and cracked. Nathaniel glanced at it and then at her. "Would you help me fix this place?" She looked around, taking in the overgrown hedges, the broken stone benches, the ivy swallowing the archways. It wasn't perfect, but it could be, just like them. She smiled for real this time. "Yeah, I think I could." They spent the afternoon pruning the roses and clearing away debris. It was hard work, but it felt good. Grounding, cleansing. Every laugh they shared, every wordless glance of understanding, stitched another thread into the fragile tapestry they were weaving. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the grounds, Amara wiped sweat from her forehead and looked around with satisfaction. "It's starting to look like a home again," she said. Nathaniel set down his tools and stood beside her, his gaze distant but hopeful. "You make it feel like one." Silence stretched between them, comfortable now. They didn't need grand speeches. They didn't need to pretend. They were 2 broken people choosing to heal together. Later that night, as Amara lay in bed, she opened the last letter from the bundle Nathaniel had given her. It wasn't dated. It wasn't even addressed. It simply read, "I will love you even when you do not know me. I will wait for the day you find your way home." Amara pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had found her way home, and for the first time in a long time, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived, with a slow, tentative warmth that coaxed life back into the gardens and laughter back into the mansion's hollow halls. Amara stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, helping Alcott and the newer house staff prepare for a gathering Nathaniel had insisted upon, a small celebration, just family and a few close friends. It felt surreal, this sense of belonging. She caught her reflection in the window. Her smile was easy now, her shoulders no longer braced for disappointment. As she arranged a tray of pastries, Nathaniel entered the kitchen, holding a weathered photo album under his arm. "Thought you might want to see these," he said, his voice casual but his eyes hopeful. They sat together in the sun-drenched parlor, flipping through the pages, photos of Nathaniel's youth, his early days building his empire, and finally, hidden in the back, a few fragile snapshots of Evelyn. Her mother... Amara traced the image of Evelyn's laughing face with a fingertip, wonder and sorrow tangled in her chest. "She was beautiful," she murmured. Nathaniel smiled sadly. She was everything. They lingered over each memory, building bridges over the years they had lost. There were still gaps, still spaces that ached, but there was more laughter now, more understanding. Healing wasn't a single moment, it was 1,000 quiet ones stitched together. Later that week, Nathaniel stood in front of the board of his company, announcing his retirement. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed, but his speech was simple. I spent decades building a legacy I thought mattered, but the only legacy worth leaving is the people we love. Amara watched from the side, pride swelling in her chest. He hadn't mentioned her name. It wasn't about public acknowledgement. It was about quiet, deliberate choices that said without words, "You matter." Afterward, he found her waiting near the exit. "I'm ready to start the next chapter," he said. Amara smiled. "So am I." Together, they poured their energy into restoring the estate, not just physically but emotionally. They opened the gardens to local families, hosted charity events, sponsored scholarships. Amara found herself drawn to community work, organizing programs for abandoned and fostered children. She told Nathaniel once, over coffee in the garden, "I want every kid who ever felt lost to know they are seen." He had simply nodded, pride softening his features. Their bond wasn't born of obligation or guilt. It was chosen, day by day, built with trust and patience and a stubborn refusal to give up on each other. On the first anniversary of her return, Nathaniel threw a modest garden party. Friends, old staff members, and new faces gathered under strings of fairy lights. As dusk fell, Nathaniel raised a toast. "To Amara," he said, voice steady, full of unspoken gratitude. "My daughter, my heart, my home." Amara felt her throat tighten as glasses clinked and cheers rose around her. She looked across the garden, the roses in bloom, the fountain flowing again, laughter spilling into the warm night air, and knew, finally and completely, that she was home. Not because of the mansion, not because of the blood they shared, but because they had chosen each other, and in that choice, they had built something beautiful, something unbreakable, something real.